we celebrate Christmas. As you know, during this month, we get into the topic of why we shouldn't or why we don't celebrate Christmas. But to better understand, we need to know more about Christmas, as Christmas has been around for thousands of years. But around the 4th century after Jesus' death, the Roman Catholic Church decided to adopt celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th, which happens to be the day of coexisting pagan festivals, as it all started during the time of Babel. As if you open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 through 12, it says, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Reboth, and Caloth. These verses talk about one great and strong hunter named Nimrod. He was one of the great warriors on earth during this time, but he was also known as a wicked king because he rebelled against God multiple times, as one of the examples being him being major part of the Tower of Babel. During this time as a king of Babel, Nimrod met a woman named Semiramis, and he had fell in love with her. But around the same time, Nimrod also claimed that he had killed God. And he made everyone believe that he was the great hunter. The reason why he supposedly killed God was so that he was able to manipulate the people into doing what he commanded. Because everybody was afraid of God because of what had happened during the time of Noah and the flood. With the deception of Nimrod, everyone believed that they were free and able to do whatever they pleased. So when Nimrod married Semiramis, she had control of all of Babel. And she created her own religion and her own priesthood. But she was also a very power-hungry person. And one day when Nimrod had died, and everyone went into mourning over the loss of their great hunter and their great leader, Semiramis decided and knew that she would lose her power over the kingdom if she didn't create a plan to stay in power. Then one day, Semiramis had an adulterous relationship with one of her priests. Her plan was set into motion. She got to the priest to manipulate the people into believing that their fallen leader Nimrod had reincarnated into Semiramis. But with this plan would make her into a goddess to the people. But to stay in power forever, she would have to marry her own son, which her son's name was Tammuz, the supposed reincarnation of Nimrod. But after marrying her own son, she knew she would have to get rid of him, or he would overthrow her in power. So when Tammuz had died, they declared Tammuz as the sun god. But if we go back a little bit, the day of Tammuz's birth happens to land on December 25th. It also happens to be the day where people celebrate the birth of Jesus. This pagan festival is filled with idolatry. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about celebrating the birth of Jesus. Not even the first Christians celebrated the birth of Jesus. Acts 17, verse 30 says, In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Focusing on celebrating the birth of Christ can often lead people into falling into celebrating idolatry. But the Bible tells us not to celebrate the birth of Jesus, but to celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus. As Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 2 to 4 says, "Thus said the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the works of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, and that it not move." It looks like they have been using the tree as a form of idolatry even before Jesus was born, as this was in the Old Testament. This tells us that decorating the tree during Christmas is just another form of worshiping idols. But when do people decorate and use their trees? On December 25th. What pagan festival is celebrated on the 25th? Tammuz. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14 to 16 says, "Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Then said he unto me, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Turn thee yet again. Thou shalt see greater abominations than these. And he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. And behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east. And they worshipped the sun towards the east." Tammuz is the sun god, and the Jews were worshiping abominations. God was showing Ezekiel what had happened to the people in Judah, that they had let the abominations into their lives and had fallen blind to the truth. These abominations adapt and seep into cultures to get people to worship these false idols and gods. Let's go back to the tree. The tree is what's mostly used during Christmas time. The tree that's usually most used during Christmas happens to be the pine tree. But what does the pine tree represent? The pine tree represents fertility and growth. So when someone puts a pine tree in their homes during December 25th and decorates it, it represents putting an idol called Tammuz. And to top it off, when someone puts gifts under the tree, it represents putting an offering to the idol Tammuz. Just like when Catholics hang or put out a picture of a dead relative or of Mary, they put offerings under it. As Exodus chapter 20, verse 3 to 5 says, "You shall have no other God before me. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, or any likeness, or anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God." God clearly tells us in his word that we shouldn't have any idols or worship any other gods, no matter what, because we are Christians and worship only one true God and no false God. 1 John chapter 5, verse 21 says, "Dear children, keep yourselves from idols." The Bible clearly tells us to not associate ourselves with these false gods and idols, as their purpose is to blind us and lead us astray from God and worshiping him. As gift giving during this pagan festival has its own pagan origin, it starts with the Tammuz cycle, as he is believed to die every year, meaning when the winter came around and the sun god dies and everyone mourns him. And one of the things they do during this time is gift gifts to their God to ensure their cycle continues. As when spring rolls around and the sun comes back up, the people that worship this false god are brainwashed into believing that their sun god has resurrected. And during the winter, they would light a fire with a Yule log to bring them hope and light as another way to honor their sun god, as they hope the cycle would continue. And over the years, it has changed and adapted over time. Even though people continue this tradition, it has changed to decorating their homes with lights. But going back to being deceived by idols, it reminds me of a story of Jonah. If we go to Jonah chapter 1, verse 4, it says, "Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to its own god, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But when Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep, the captain went to him and said, 'How can you sleep? Get up and call your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish.' Then the sailors said to each other, 'Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity.' They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, 'Tell us who is responsible for making all this trouble for us. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?' He answered, 'I am Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land.' This terrified them, and they asked, 'What have you done?' They knew he was running away from the Lord, because he had already told them so. The seas were getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, 'What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?' 'Pick me up and throw me into the sea,' he replied, 'and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you.' Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, 'Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased.'" We see in this story that other people in this boat started praying to their gods to deliver them from the storm. And the captain was going and telling everyone, "Make sure that you pray to your gods." But when their gods didn't answer them, they went and started praying to Jonah's God. Where was their God? Their God wasn't there when they needed them. These idols and false gods were created to mask the fact that they all serve one, and that's the devil. As 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 19 to 21 says, "What say I then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to the devils and not to God. And I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. Ye cannot drink from the cup of the Lord and the cup of the devils. Ye cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of devils." As Christmas is just another pagan festival to trick people into celebrating it, as we go back to the origin of Christmas, we need to understand that from the start, it was the devil's plan to create this pagan festival to draw people away from God. As the origin of Christmas was created to dirty the virgin birth of Jesus, so that we can't partake in things, so we cannot partake in things that don't honor God. and do the exact opposite of honoring God. John 8:44 say, chapter 8 verse 44 says, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of liars." The devil is the Antichrist, meaning the opposite of Christ. So everything he does is the opposite and against God. So why would we celebrate a festival that is against God if we are children of God? The answer is that people get brainwashed and blinded into celebrating these festivals. When I was doing my research for this study, I came across this word multiple times. And it was the word Christianized. And it got me to think that the reason why people fall into these traps of the devil is because they believe that they're rewording or changing. They're rewording or changing around a festival so that it can honor God. And it's the right way that they think. That they think they're outsmarting the devil. But it's farther from the truth. Let me give you an example. If I were to cover myself with a blanket and say that my name is Javier, then someone comes along and starts talking to me thinking I'm Javier. Because I say I'm Javier, but when I take off the blanket, it's me, Christian. They were talking to the whole entire time. It's the same as these pagan festivals. Christians believe they are celebrating and worshiping God during Christmas, but all they're doing is worshiping the devil. So I'll end with this verse. Matthew chapter 26, verse 41 says, "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." You know, during these times during these times